Following the short-lived reign of the Psychic types in Generation 1, quelled by the rise of the new Dark typing in the second generation, a largely forgotten rare type known to only 2 Pokemon until this point, would re-emerge to conquer the world of Pokemon for a full decade spanning 3 entire generations. The Dragon-type Empire would boast the longest reign in Pokemon-type history, until, however, these things started to arrive in Generation 6, conducting a violent and relentless overthrow of the dragons. Now, upon the upcoming release of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, the fairy types face a severe threat that no one foresaw.
What's going on, guys? It's Soul Spectre here, and as my epic narration alter ego has said, the fairy type is looking like it's going to take a massive hit with the new games. After providing a huge counter to the previously dominant dragon types, the fairy type became arguably the best type in the Pokemon metagame for quite some time. Unfortunately, or fortunately if you happen to be one of those who hate fairies, the upcoming Nintendo Switch games are looking like it's going to change this pretty quickly. Why, you ask? Well, let's find out by looking at 5 reasons the fairy type is going to be absolute garbage in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. The first reason is of course the limited selection of fairy-type Pokemon in these new games. Keep in mind that only Kanto Pokemon will be featured in these games, and although the fairy typing wasn't around back in Generation 1, it was later added to a few Pokemon, but only Clefable, Wigglytuff, which is also part normal type, and Mr. Mime, which is also part psychic type. Of course, Alolan Ninetales also got the fairy typing, but since we do not yet have confirmation as to which Alolan forms will be in the games, I'm going to consider all of them separately in reason number 5. One of the ways to measure how good a given type is to look at how many good Pokemon have that type. And looking at these 3, we can say that Clefable is the only notable Pokemon in terms of battling power, since both Wigglytuff and Mr. Mime are both in the PU tier, the worst tier in competitive battling according to Smogon. Right off the bat, things are not looking good, but there is a lot more bad news for these deceptive pink demons. In Generation 2, 2 new typings, Dark and Steel, were introduced in an attempt to balance out the metagame since Psychic types were so incredibly overpowered in Generation 1. Oddly enough, both of these types interact with the Fairy type in interesting ways. Fairy is of course super effective against Dark, and Steel is super effective against Fairy. Unfortunately for the Fairy type, none of the original 151 Pokemon have acquired the Dark typing. This means that one of the Fairy type's major advantages, its super effectiveness against the Dark type, will not be put into use at all, which is really terrible. To add fuel to the fire, while there are no Dark types for the Fairy type to overpower in the original 151 Pokemon, Magneton did end up acquiring the Steel typing in Generation 2, which is one of the 2 types that Fairy type Pokemon are weak to. Ouch. So, no weak Dark types to pick on, and one pesky super effective Steel type to have to consider. What about the Fairy type's other weakness to Poison? Oh boy. This is where things start getting real bad. Unfortunately enough for the Fairy type, Poison types were immensely prevalent in Generation 1, like ridiculously so. Out of the original 151 Pokemon, 33 of them have the Poison type, with 13 of those being fully evolved Pokemon and many powerful ones at that, including Venusaur, Beedrill, Arbok, Nidoqueen, Nidoking, Golbat, Vileplume, Venomoth, Victreebel, Tentacruel, Muck, Gengar, and Weezing. The sheer amount of Poison types that are going to be in this game is a death sentence for the Fairy types. But as if the Fairies haven't been quite beaten down to the ground enough yet, there's still more. Alright, so 3 Fairy types in the game, no Dark types to overpower, a super effective fully evolved Steel type to consider, and 13 fully evolved super effective Poison types. Things can't get any worse, right? What about the Dragon types that Fairies are super effective against? I mean, come on, there's Dratini and Dragonair and Dragonite and... oh boy. 1 fully evolved Dragon type in the entire game, eh? Yikes. This is really not looking good. Fairy-type Pokemon are of course also super effective against fighting types, but given that Gen 1 had 151 Pokemon, 5 fully evolved fighting-type Pokemon is a very small number. And this means that in total, the Fairy type is only super effective against 6 fully evolved Pokemon in the entire region of Kanto. Now I know, many of you at this point are probably like,
well, what about the Alolan forms, Sylph? Certainly they'll help fairies out.
So at this point we do have confirmation that some Alolan forms will be obtainable in these games. However, we don't know how many nor which ones will be. But just for the sake of argument, let's assume that all of the Alolan forms will be available, which is admittedly quite possible. This would mean that we get access to one more Fairy Pokemon in the form of Ninetales, since even Alolan Vulpix doesn't get the Fairy type, bringing the total to 4 fully evolved Fairy types. In addition, this would also add 3 more fully evolved Dark types in the form of Alolan Raticate, Persian, and Muck. However, since Alolan Muck is also part Poison type, it's not weak to Fairy, so only 2 of them, Raticate and Persian, count as Dark types with Fairy weaknesses. Furthermore, another Dragon type is of course added in the form of Alolan Exeggutor, giving another Pokemon that Fairies would be super effective against. Unfortunately for the Fairy type, there are no Fighting type Alolan forms it would be super effective against. We also have to keep in mind that 2 new fully evolved Steel types come into play in the form of Alolan Sandslash and Alolan Dugtrio, and of course Alolan Muck has the Poison type still. Overall, this means that Alolan forms add 1 more Fairy type, with 3 more fully evolved Pokemon that the Fairy type is super effective against, and 3 fully evolved Pokemon that Fairies are weak to, meaning that kind of balances out, and the only benefit really is the addition of another Fairy type Pokemon, meaning Alolan forms on the whole help the Fairy type situation ever so slightly. So let's tally all of this up and see where the Fairy type stands when all of these factors are taken into consideration, including all of the Alolan forms. Since, in addition to competitive battling, in-game play is also very important for these games, meaning unevolved Pokemon also contribute significantly, we'll create 2 charts that consider all of the relevant fully evolved Pokemon and all of the relevant Pokemon including those that aren't fully evolved. So in terms of fully evolved Pokemon, there will be 4 Fairy types available, they'll be strong against 11 Pokemon, and they'll be weak to 18 Pokemon. Including not fully evolved Pokemon, there will be 6 Fairy types available, they'll be strong against 16 Pokemon, and they'll be weak to a whopping 41 Pokemon. Looking at these stats, it's quite evident that the Fairy type is going to have a very rough time, both in-game and competitively in Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. Anyway guys, there we go, 5 reasons why the Fairy type is going to be absolutely terrible in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've been really looking forward to the new games and I'm trying to experiment with the kinds of content that I do, so let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this video. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to my channel with notifications on so you don't miss my next upload. This has been Sylph Spectre and I'll see you guys next time for some more Pokemon content.